Good morning, friends. When we return to Romans chapter 3, we read a couple of familiar phrases that we haven't talked about much yet. Those are in verses 22 and 23, where it simply says, "For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." And the question I'd like to answer today is, why does Paul mention a distinction? He says there is no distinction, but who or what is he talking about? Well, this has to do with the way the Jewish people felt about themselves and their relationship to the law and the righteousness of God that we talked about yesterday. Because they knew full well that the law was the righteousness of God, and also that God had given the law to them and not to the other people in the world. And by their reasoning, that meant that they, by default, possessed the righteousness of God and so were acceptable to God. The problem with that, of course, is that it's a very dangerous thing to think that just because you have the written law of God, that you also have the righteousness of God or his acceptance. But that's what they thought. They were more concerned with possessing the law than they were in recognizing the importance of actually obeying the law. They should have looked at the law and said, "Oh my, based on what I'm seeing here, I don't think I'm really righteous at all. I need to look to God for mercy." But instead, with some notable exceptions, they use the law as a badge of righteousness, as if you could just pin it on your chest and then claim it for your own. And that's why Paul writes, "For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Because Paul is writing to a predominantly Gentile audience in Rome, but there likely were some Jewish folks present, and so he's making sure to clarify that no one was starting from a position of privilege when it came to salvation or the Christian life. Yes, the Jewish people received the law from God, and the Gentiles didn't, but the reality is that all have sinned, Jew and Gentile alike. And everyone, no matter whether Jew or Gentile, would meet the exact same judgment if it weren't for God's gracious salvation found in Christ, received through faith in him. And that's, of course, an important theological point to understand. We're all in the same boat by nature. It doesn't matter where you were born, when you were born, under what circumstances, or to what parents. All mankind is together bound to the power of sin and its dreadful consequences according to our very natures. But there's also an important point of daily life application here, because especially for folks, admittedly like myself, who've grown up in the church, it's easy to fall into the same kind of thinking that the ancient Jewish people had. But instead of saying, "I have the law, therefore I must be acceptable to God," we might find ourselves saying something like, "I've gone to church all my life. If the doors were open, I was there." Or, "I've supported the church for years. I haven't missed a week of tithing since I became a member." Or even, "My parents were Christians and I was raised a Christian." And there's nothing wrong with any of that. Please don't misunderstand me. Nothing wrong with any of that. I hope that's the case. It's wonderful if that's been the case in your life. Just as there was nothing wrong for the Jewish people to have received God's law. It was wonderful that they received God's law. But we must be so careful that we don't have that same mindset of thinking that because we were born into those circumstances or because we achieved some kind of earthly milestones that we then have advantage or privilege with God, as if God must accept us on account of those things. Because the truth remains, there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So let us never forget that we are justified, we are declared righteous, we are saved by the gift of God freely and graciously given, and not because of anything that we've done ourselves to earn it. And if we can keep that truth in mind, not only will we understand and be all the more joyful and thankful for our own salvation, but we will be just that much more humble and patient and compassionate toward those people who haven't come out of the same so-called Christian cultural mold as we have. The Jews had to learn the hard way that God fully intended on saving people out of the whole world, not just their insulated communities. And we must never forget either that God is going to save people from all sorts of lifestyles and backgrounds out of the world and into his church. Not our church, mind you, but into his church. And there is no distinction between me and you, or us and them, or anyone. No matter the background, no matter the previous lifestyle, no matter the previous sin, we all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and each one whom God has chosen has been saved not by their own works, but by the grace of God alone. Friends, have a good and godly day, and if the Lord wills, I will see you tomorrow.